Who is a person that everyone thought was crazy, but they ended up being right? Ignaz Semmelweis. In 1846, Semmelweis proposed the idea that hand washing could prevent the spread of disease in hospitals. He was ridiculed during his time, sent to a mental asylum, and died forgotten by his peers. Died of a staph infection, which might have been prevented with proper hand washing. Life is full of cruel ironies. Alfred Wegener, who first proposed continental drift, what would ultimately become plate tectonics. Geologists of the day considered him an outsider and rejected his theory. I have a geology book from circa 1960, where the old prevailing theory is well explained, but the field is declared as controversial, because there are competing theories, among which is the far-fetched notion of continental drift and plate tectonics. The conclusion is that the jury will likely be out for a long time. Very interesting how science develops over time. Ludwig Boltzmann. His equations and formulas explained the physical properties of matter, but as it went against the then accepted laws of physics, he was ridiculed and ignored for years, while fighting for atom theory to be accepted. He took his own life just 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory. The introduction to the classic textbook on statistical mechanics humorously begins. Ludwig Boltzmann, who spent much of his life studying statistical mechanics, died in 1906 by his own hand. Paul Ehrenfest, carrying on the work, died similarly in 1933. Now it is our turn to study statistical mechanics. Lindy Chamberlain Creighton. A dingo really did eat her baby. That poor woman. It was a joke my entire childhood. The worst part was that it was common knowledge among the Aboriginal people, and the Aboriginal trackers used at the time told people that they tracked the dingo until it crossed a road where its tracks were obscured by people and vehicles. Added for context, it was popularly believed at the time that dingoes don't attack humans, and the blatant racism meant that the testimonies of the trackers weren't heeded. My grandma. She insisted people kept stealing her newspaper, and specifically said it was someone in a white van. Grandma was always a little off, so we just thought she was paranoid and had a bad delivery person. Until one day my mom and I are driving past her house and a white van in front of us stopped, stole my grandma's newspaper, and drove off. Grandma wasn't crazy after all, at least not about that. This one is so damn random. I mean, why hers? Did someone have a vendetta? Also such a shitty thing to do to an old lady. I'm guessing it was probably because she wasn't up super early and picking it up, so it would be out there half the morning. And though she wasn't on a really busy street, it did get a bit of through traffic. There were only a few houses on that block, so she also may have been the only one to get the paper, though this was 25 years or more ago, so maybe not. It's also possible that it was the guy that banged on her door one day to tell her she needed to cut down the bush at the corner of her yard, because he'd almost been in an accident, because he couldn't see past the cedar bush that was planted there. Then again, she was certain he was throwing weed killer or plant poison in the bush to kill it, since some branches did start dying. I was secretly glad that G.D. Bush died, because I was almost in accidents there, too. So, who knows, honestly. Some of the elderly patients with dementia in a home in my city kept complaining they weren't given food. Everyone thought they must have forgotten that they'd already eaten, as people with dementia sometimes do. Nope. Turns out, some pieces of shit nursing staff didn't always give everyone their meals, amongst other abuse. This sadly happens everywhere. My best friend worked in memory care off and on since she was around 19 years old. The amount of dementia residents who suffer abuse or neglect is far more frequent than actually being treated well. The statistics are all over the place, but I believe worldwide the rates of abuse for dementia residents varies from 32% to 62%. And in the US it is 47%. It's horrendous. It doesn't help that so many people abandon their family in these facilities, and so they have nobody to advocate for them. My friend would try so hard to be a hero for the residents, and her bosses/owners would shut her down and reprimanded her. My dad went from one of the smartest, sharpest people I've ever known to the mentality of a toddler shortly after his brother and mother died, a couple days apart. He had a massive heart attack not too long after, spent weeks in ICU, and was put on hospice. Because of the dementia he was documented as a fall risk, and the hospital and hospice care were on top of it. He had a sudden turn for the better, and was moved to a home to finish recovery, before release. Either the hospital didn't pass on the information, or the employees didn't care, but he ended up falling out of bed, a couple of days after the transfer. He broke a couple ribs, and punctured a lung. They didn't check on him, or run any tests. They just stuck him back in bed, and he asphyxiated on his own blood. If they had done their due diligence, he would probably still be with us. My mom, too. She withered away faster than a head of iceberg lettuce, in the middle of the Gobi Desert, after he passed. Barry James Marshall was one of the scientists who discovered that the bacteria H. pylori causes stomach ulcers. However, getting people to believe it was difficult. It was thought that lifestyle and excessive stomach acid were the main factor that lead to ulcers, so, when he suggested that a bacterial infection could cause it, no one believed him. In response, he infected himself with H. pylori by drinking cultures, which in turn gave himself stomach ulcers, and then treated the infection. He and Robin Warren received a Nobel Prize for this discovery. Learned this when my dad was in the hospital with a bleeding ulcer. You know the man is feeling better when he's explaining all this from the hospital bed. CSB, my stepfather had bad ulcers ever since I first met him, in 1978 or so. Would vomit every night, there would be occasional bleeding, medication was of limited help. It was normal life for him. I went off to university and then, when starting grad school, I read, in Science I think, about H. pylori, and the research. The next time I called home I told my parents what I had read, and told them to ask the doctor. I made sure they wrote down H.pylori. You know how it is, trying to get parents to remember details about things they are not familiar with. Anyway, they asked him, and he said, "I hadn't heard of that, I'll look into it." A couple of days later, they had a prescription for antibiotics, and the problem went away for the rest of his life. It was the first time my parents acknowledged that I might actually be learning something useful there. Christine Collins, famously portrayed by Angelina Jolie in the movie Changeling. After her son was abducted, the police found him months later, and reunited them. But Christine was adamant that it wasn't her son Walter, and was an imposter. Even though she had evidence to prove it, she was temporarily committed by the officer in charge of the case, and even after the kid admitted he lied and wasn't Walter, it still took over a week to release Christine. Her son Walter was abducted and was a victim in the Wineville chicken coop murders. Very interesting true crime, but God, it was hard to listen to. I heard that recent DNA testing proved definitively that he was not related to her at all. They didn't need DNA tests. It was a completely different kid. He was 3 years older than Walter Collins, a few inches shorter, didn't know his teacher's name, and was uncircumcised, unlike her son. The kid admitted he was a runaway, and only lied about being her son, so he could come to California and meet celebrities, and he was sent back to his real home. The kid's teachers and dentists even said that this was a completely different kid, and they still threw Christine in a mental hospital. The police at the time were facing a lot of bad press, and they needed a win, and they got one when they found the missing boy, and they weren't about to just admit they messed up. It's widely suspected that the real Walter was murdered. You're thinking of Bobby Dunbar, who disappeared near a swamp in 1912, and likely drowned and was eaten by alligators. They found another boy, Bruce Anderson, who kinda looked like him, and stole him away from his impoverished family. The family tried to prove that their son was not Bobby, but had no luck. Decades later, his descendants did a DNA test, which showed that they were not related to the Dunbar family, but at that point, Bruce, his parents, and all his siblings had all been dead for some time. Gotaku Wamura. He was the longtime mayor of the Japanese town of Fudai, 1940s-1980s. While mayor, he learned that the town had been devastated, in the past, by tsunamis. He literally saw the bodies from one of the disasters, and ordered the construction of an enormous seawall. While other towns in the area also had seawalls, this thing was considered insanely high, or overkill. The project was hideously expensive, and he was relentlessly mocked. He died in 1997. In 2011, a tsunami struck Japan, killing 20,000 people. The seawall worked as planned, protecting Fudai, and the town escaped, almost untouched. Topher Grace got a lot of flack on that '70s show for being antisocial and cold towards his castmates. Turns out, they were all massive a-holes. I didn't know all of them were bad, I just thought one was really bad. Laura Prepon was a Scientologist. I definitely wouldn't want to get too close to a Scientologist. Given Ashton Kutcher's defense of Danny Masterson, I wonder what Ashton was like back then. Not that I think he is, or was, a predator, but did he turn a blind eye to sketchy stuff? Wilmer Valderrama has a history of dating girls who were still teenagers when he was in his 20s, Mandy Moore, Lindsay Lohan, and Demi Lovato. Danny is definitely the worst, but I don't blame Topher for not wanting to hang around with most of them. John Lydon of the Sex Pistols tried to warn the world about the crimes of Jimmy Savile in an interview in 1978, and was banned from appearing on the BBC for his trouble. Courtney Love, similar with Harvey Weinstein. What's effed up is, she couldn't just say it, she had to put it in the form of, if Harvey Weinstein asks you to meet at his hotel, don't do it. If you see him do it, and there isn't anything concrete to prove it, you could be held for libel or slander. It's a good shield to prevent people from just burning each other randomly, but also prevents people who know something from talking about it publicly. Writer Ernest Hemingway was convinced the FBI had him under surveillance. His friends and family told him he was nutters, until some unsealed records, a while back, proved that he actually was being followed, had his phones bugged, etc. I think this played a part in his as well. Everyone thought he was out of his mind. I can't imagine what he went through. The guy had a bunch of concussions during his life. He loved boxing, involved himself more directly than most journalists during the Spanish Civil War, and then World War II, and survived 2 back-to-back plane crashes. In the second crash, he had to break open a door with his head, and fractured his skull. He suffered from what we would now call post-concussive disease. Headaches, memory loss, and his long-standing issues with depression got worse. Sinead O'Connor. Okay, so, she was a little crazy, but she was also right. In October 1992, O'Connor performed an a cappella rendition of Bob Marley's War on Saturday Night Live. During the song, she ripped up a photo of Pope John Paul II, in protest of the Catholic Church's rampant essay of children, almost a decade before the rest of the world knew, or cared, about the offenses. She was banned from SNL, and was largely blacklisted from the entertainment industry as a whole afterward. At the time, nobody really knew what her message was. I was watching, and SA was never brought up. I figured it had something to do with the Catholics versus the Protestants in Ireland, and it seemed like she was blaming the Pope for the violence. Rose McGowan. She was talking crazy shit about people following her, and ex-Mossad agents being involved. She was dismissed as insane. Turns out, Weinstein had an army of spies he had following victims to keep them quiet, including the exact people she had described. Sister Kenny, and her physical therapy for polio victims. The treatment at the time was to lock up the affected limbs in braces or casts, leaving the patient crippled for life. Her idea of using hot compresses and gently moving the limbs took a very long time to be accepted by the medical establishment, as she was a woman, and just a nurse. Gustave Caillebotte. He was born to a wealthy Parisian family in 1848. His father owned a textile business that he later inherited. He was an artist in his own right, but became much more known as a supporter of the arts. Fearful he'd die young, he writes in his will that the French state accept his large art collection, today valued at several $1 billion, and hang art from several Impressionist artists, who were friends of his, in a national museum upon his death. Caillebotte dies young, 45, in 1894, as he predicted, and so, his will attempts to be executed. The French government initially refuses the request. Pundits and critics, from art to politics, view the request as absurd, and publicly say how repulsed they are by the collection itself. Several art professors from École des Beaux-Arts threaten to resign if the government enacts the will. In the end, half of Caillebotte's art collection gets hung in 1897 at the Musée du Luxembourg, and the public comes out in droves to visit the gallery because of all the press Caillebotte's request had received after his death. People wanted to see this ugly art. The artists featured? Their names were Monet, Renoir, Degas, Cézanne, Manet, Pissarro, and Sisley. It's very possible these artists would never have become the household names they are today, had Caillebotte not liked the ugly, unsellable art that a few of these friends of his made. Marshall McLuhan. His theories on how media usage changes how we think and interact with each other were prophetic. He predicted the internet and how a worldwide instant form of communication would create tribes of people centered around their own echo chambers. He also wrote about how using media changes how we think and process information. Considered a crazy pop culture media and literature speculator in the 60s, now his ideas have been pretty much confirmed by modern neuroscience and communication study. Sadly, he died before the internet happened. It would have been incredible to see his theories on social media. Harlem J. Bretz was a geologist who in the 1920s proposed that the geologic features of the channeled scablands of eastern and central Washington were the result of a massive flood during the last ice age at 15,000 years ago, when a glacial dam in northern Idaho catastrophically collapsed, releasing the waters of Lake Missoula. Lake Missoula is estimated to have contained a volume of water equivalent to Lakes Erie and Ontario combined, and the resulting flood, through what is now eastern Washington, and out through the Columbia Gorge, released a water flow exceeding the combined flow of all other rivers on the planet. Bretz was soundly ridiculed when he proposed this scenario in the 1920s, but was eventually vindicated over the next 50 years, and was eventually awarded the Geological Society of America's prestigious Penrose Medal in 1979, at the age of 96. By that time, as he put it, all his detractors were dead, so he had no one left to gloat over. The many British postal workers fired and prosecuted for stealing. Many were lifelong employees. Some committed deaths. This went on for almost 2 decades. Spoiler, it was a surveillance software glitch that went ignored for years. They were all innocent. Edit: surveillance software was hyperbole on my part, and incorrect. I honestly forgot exactly what the software's purpose was, only that it was buggy AF, and incorrectly flagged employees, or employee activity, in a way that made it look like they were stealing. Gary Webb, the San Jose Mercury News reporter that uncovered the CIA link to crack cocaine into Los Angeles. The government used other newspapers to discredit him. A few years later, he was found in his home with 2 bullet holes in his head, and the coroner ruled it as S. He was right. I had a aunt/cousin, not really aunt, but everyone in Spanish families calls everyone tías or primas, so who even knows? Anyway, she was convinced her then 35-year-old husband was having an affair with her much younger 20-year-old cousin. A summer she let the cousin stay during a visit to the States. It got to the point where her own family thought she was being crazy. They ended up getting separated, and she was thought of as the paranoid person in the family, and a lot of people sadly turned on her and stopped being in contact. The divorce happened shortly after. And guess who, a year after, the ex-husband ends up marrying? Yep. Jackie Stewart. He was sick and tired of burying his friends due to racing accidents, so he started advocating for safety at the tracks, in the cars, and pushing for more qualified medical personnel. He once said, "I'd be more popular if I would shut up and drive." Dead, but more popular. Stewart was a 3-time world champion, for the record. He also won on the hardest track ever built, the Nürburgring Nordschleife, by 4 minutes, with a broken wrist. The man was as hard a racer as they come, and yet, he was ridiculed for not wanting to see himself and others get injured or killed while racing. Many of the things Stewart pushed for then are requirements at nearly every racing event today. Many years ago, a new stoplight was installed near my house at a fairly busy multi-lane intersection. The first time I went to this light, I was taking a left. Waited in the left turn lane until I got a green arrow, and proceeded into the intersection, as did the person coming from my left who was going straight, and also had a green light. We almost crashed, but at the time, I assumed they had run the light, and I'm sure they assumed the same about me. On my way home, I sat in an adjacent parking lot and watched, and sure enough, the lights were timed completely wrong and giving conflicting drivers the right of way at the same time, and I saw 3 other near misses in about 10 minutes. I called the police to report it, and they essentially laughed at me. The next day, 2 people died in a crash at that intersection, and they fixed the light by the end of the next night. I'm guessing they wished they'd taken a look when I told them about it. Barbara Lee was the only member of U.S. Congress to vote against the post-9/11 authorization for use of military force, because it was too broad and did not have a clear objective or duration, warning that It could lead to an endless war. For this, she was harassed, and threatened for her position, and safety. Turns out, the UMP resolution was indeed a blank check for the Pentagon, to use military force, on whoever they wanted, for the foreseeable future. When I was a cop, there was this lady, who called every week and said, someone had been in her house. I mean, dozens of cops went out there, and she would say like, her dresser drawer was open, and she knew it had been closed, when she left the house. Never any signs of forced entry, no prints, nothing to say, this was anything other than a crazy person. Until months later, one of her high school students was caught with a key to her house. Turns out, this kid had been sneaking in, and just moving shit slightly, to F with her. The Dixie Chicks, now just the Chicks, spoke out against Bush and the blatant oil grab in the Middle East. They were lambasted and removed from media, seemingly overnight. When the truth finally came out, they performed, not ready to make nice, and it was awesome. It wasn't just oil. Energy companies wanted the oil and gas pipelines, but many other companies wanted things like poppy fields to make opiates, and mineral rights for the metals needed to support tech companies. It was also a huge boost to arms companies that saw their profits skyrocket overnight. People focus on the oil because it's the easiest one to understand. But plenty of companies made an absolute fortune out of the Iraq War, and continue to do so. Lieutenant David Steves. On May 9, 1957, he was on a mission to fly a new training jet, a Lockheed T-33, from Hamilton Air Force Base in Novato, California, to Craig AFB, in Alabama. The plane was lost from radar, and the Air Force couldn't find the missing plane, or pilot. The military declared Steves dead, and that was that. Until, that is, 54 days later, when Steves emerged from the Sierra, having been found badly malnourished, and still limping badly, on swollen ankles. His story is heartbreaking. Accused of selling the plane to the Russians, because they couldn't find the wreckage. Poor guy, he died before they finally found the evidence that his story was true all along. He was killed in Boise, Idaho, in the crash of a modified Stinson, the wreckage of which was found right away. Damn. Shuji Nakamura, inventor of the first commercially viable blue LED, which was the precursor to the white LED. Without white LEDs, you would not be reading this on your smartphone, under the soft glow of high-efficiency LED light bulbs. The key component to the blue and white LED is gallium nitride, which had eluded engineers for decades, and was widely dismissed as a dead end. Nichia, Nakamura's former employer, tried several times to kill his research and development, after years, with no results. Marie Adler, a foster child, was art in her apartment. She reported the art to the Linwood, WA, police department. Her foster mother spoke with the police, and mentioned she didn't think Marie was upset enough, and thought Marie was lying. There was almost no physical evidence, and the Linwood police forced Marie to retract her story, prosecuted Marie for lying to police, fined her $500, and she lost her apartment. Her story was published in the paper as though she had lied, and she was ridiculed and ostracized by her peers for lying. Her heiress was found several years later. He was a serial heirist who committed R in different jurisdictions, and part of his MO was to photograph his victims and force them to shower, just as he had done to Marie. Two female detectives had found a camera the heiress stole from Marie, with pictures from the night of her R, and had recognized the heiress' MO from reading the newspaper stories detailing the punishment Marie had received for reporting the R to the Linwood police. My first wife, who always said I had more mental health issues than just the one diagnosed at the time we were together. I put her through hell for years, and she kept doing her best to help, support, and protect me from myself. She did this even before we were married. We are still good friends to this day. This is a super niche thing, but it happened recently, and it's unbelievably hilarious. There is a Twitter progression. A few months ago, someone tweeted, "There are Jews living under my apartment. I live at ground level, and I have no basement. It's like they are digging or something." He was mocked, accused of hearing voices, called racist, the works. He posted again, "I swear, I keep hearing Yiddish under the floor of my New York apartment. I live at ground level, and we have no basement." Again, most of the comments recommended that he get his head checked for hearing invisible Jews. Anyway, a Brooklyn synagogue was recently caught digging illegal tunnels. He tweeted, "Some of you owe me an apology. I swear I lost it over this. I could not stop laughing. You can't make it up."